Counter-Narrative News, continuing with our special series on Roy Sawh, the Guyanese heritage, black power, pioneering, revolutionary leader. He was born in Guyana to a very poor working class family on the 11th of January 1934, and he arrives in London in March 1958. And he becomes a significant figure along with other kind of vanguard activists at the grassroots, developing a confident, assertive, unapologetic, radical working class socialist anti-colonial politics, which is encapsulated around the slogan of Black Power, which was initiated by Stokely Carmichael, later Kwame Ture, in the struggle against Jim Crow, white supremacist violent racism in Alabama, in the Jim Crow South, in the late 50s into the 60s with the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. We are going to quote from a book on Roy Sawh and by Roy Sawh, published in 1987 by Hansip Publishers. And also, Hansip is also a pioneering Caribbean black publishers led by Arif Ali. And salutations, Arif. I hope you're well. And so this is an article from the book that's published in 1987 called From Where I Stand, Roy Sawh, Britain's most outspoken black advocate, stating things that black people want to hear and white people fear. So this is an essay published initially in the book called Justice First, edited by Lewis Donnelly. And Roy Sawh puts forward his thinking on black power. This essay is published in 1968. So quite early on, and even the Race Today collective, who were quite critical in their comments towards Roy Sawh in their pamphlet, which we shared, which we'd encourage other people to see the other first episode in this Roy Sawh series, which we uploaded yesterday. Even the Race Today collective had to admit that Roy Sawh and his comrade Michael De Freitas of the Racial Adjustment Action Society, RAS, were the first to kind of really intervene with radical black power politics in the grassroots struggles, in the industrial trade union struggle, that is, in the mid-60s. So that's an interesting report there. But to go to this, it's called Black Power in Britain, 1968, Roy Sawh. To quote, "All men are born free, but it's always the white man who has given the black man his freedom. It is also an accepted fact among many people that it was the white man who, in the first place, enslaved the black man. That is why he always tells the world that he must give the black man his freedom. If one accepts the fact that to give back freedom one must have previously taken it away, then it is absurd to talk about making people free. In order to understand black power, one must also understand how white power functions. There is no such thing as a black problem. What we are really talking about is a white problem. We are talking about the nuisance value of a race of people who, because of a delusion about the color of their skin, are determined by words and deeds to reduce the rest of humanity to a level of animality from which they can never rise again. For too many years, black people in different parts of the world have been suffering at the hands of white people, wherever the black man may be. In Harlem, Angola, Vietnam, Rhodesia, Brixton or South Africa, we draw the same water of affliction from the hands of the same man, the white man. We know that, with the exception of a few, the attitude of white people to black people all over the world is the same. We know that the only difference between the Ian Smiths and the Harold Wilsons of the world is not a difference in principle, but only a difference in tactics. We know that the quarrel between Smith and Wilson is not a quarrel between fascism and anti-fascism, but a quarrel between frankness and hypocrisy within a fascist framework. We have read the PEP report on racial discrimination, which now forms part of the history of our situation in this country. For who else would know how the white man's laws work? The 1965 Race Relations Act, which was brought out for our welfare, is the same act which was used against black people. I myself was arrested 4 times under the Race Relations Act and charged with having made a speech allegedly inciting others to racial hatred. But when people like Enoch Powell and Duncan Sandys stood up and made speeches which were inflammatory enough to be condemned by the Archbishop of Canterbury, we found that these people were not arrested. And it is because of these factors that we realized that, perhaps inevitably, Smith and Wilson, Enoch Powell and Duncan Sandys merely reflect the Anglo-Saxon global attitude on racialism. We are aware of the plight of the black man in America and in Canada. Anglo-Saxon fascism has crystallized into European preferential migration and the Anti-Asiatic Act. We know that in Australia, the Anglo-Saxon civilization has become enshrined in the White Australia policy, and that in South Africa it has escalated to the dizzy heights of apartheid. The English have always complained that apartheid has nothing to do with the English. It was a creation of the Dutch Boer, they say. But it is as well to remember that when the Nationalist Party was given its independence in 1910, the clause denying the black man the right to vote was actually written into the Constitution, and it is because of this fact today that I define apartheid as the incapacity of the Dutch Boer to practice Anglo-Saxon racialism with the assured hypocrisy of the Anglo-Saxons themselves. We also know that in Rhodesia, Anglo-Saxon fascism is rearing its head under the Unilateral Declaration of Independence, UDI, and the white world, despite the protestations of kith and kin statements, is applauding the rebels. Pause. The UDI was Rhodesian white minority rule, i.e. apartheid, white supremacist rule there, basically breaking its link with Britain and the Commonwealth in protest against any kind of pressure towards coming from basically the black resistance. So it was a even more right-wing white supremacist kind of reaction to double down on the apartheid regime in Rhodesia there, which becomes liberated Zimbabwe. To continue the quote, if one were to pinpoint the areas of the world where racial problems are most intense, the prominence of areas of Anglo-Saxon civilization becomes obvious. The cultural mother of all of them was only the last to close another chapter on legalized racism when her government introduced the Commonwealth Immigration Act of 1962, followed by the White Paper in 1965. With the recent Immigration Act of 1968, where black people have been denied the right of entry into this country just because of the colour of their skin, Britain has finally joined the ranks of other white power countries in legalizing racism in the world. These examples which I have given are called by different names, but in actual fact they can all be classified as examples of the white power structure. Because black people are powerless, they could do nothing to prevent this kind of legislation. But we had some form of power, either political or economic. There is always the possibility that we could neutralize the situation, if not overcome it. If the Viet Cong had not had some power, the Americans would have been much more successful in imposing their way of life on the Vietnamese people. The war in Vietnam could be over tomorrow if the Viet Cong had 2 nuclear missiles, one aimed at New York and the other at California. And for the first time, the American people would experience the horror that is an everyday experience for the Vietnamese. One can read in the newspaper reports on the fighting that 10,000 Viet Cong had been killed, but American losses were not severe, or 5,000 Viet Cong killed. American losses not estimated, or again 2,000 Viet Cong killed, some Americans missing. If one takes the total of those estimated dead between 1965 and 1968, according to the white man's propaganda, it would be shown that the Americans have killed twice the population of Vietnam already. I wonder whom they are really fighting. Take a look at the map of Africa and you will find that all the islands of the coast of Africa belong to some white country, and even Hong Kong, which is 10,000 miles from Britain and so close to China, is a British colony. If Britain really believes that power confers the right to dominate other countries, then when the day comes for China to rule the waves, I wonder if the British people would concede the Isle of Wight as a colony to the Chinese. The Opium Wars, which resulted in the so-called treaties which were signed by China and the white powers of the West, reduced China to a non-entity. But today, after the Chinese Revolution, China is no longer a paper tiger, but in reality a Black Panther, which is being driven into a little corner. The English are by no means the most beautiful race in the world, nor are they the ugliest, but I must confess that I find them a truly remarkable race. Their whole way of life is based on the Christian ethic, and all other so-called morals are determined by their own definitions. In this society, owing to the influence of Christianity, the concept of beauty is denoted by white, and ugly things are characterized as black. When English newspapers and journals speak of anything as sinful, they always say, as black as sin. Similarly, when they talk of those things which are pure and gold, they talk in terms of white. Even when the newspapers describe the situation in Vietnam, they say it looks very black. It is this kind of thinking which generates the belief that black power is associated with everything which is evil, killing, burning, violence, and genocide. The domination of black peoples by white peoples is not called white power, but it is called by different names like slavery, indentured workers, colonials, Commonwealth immigrants, and now second-class citizens. But in reality, this is what white power is all about. The world in which we live today is a world where white is right, and right is might, and might means power, and all the power in the world is controlled by white nations. The survival of black people in the world is controlled by white people whose fingers are constantly on the trigger. It is crystal clear to me that the world is divided between north and south, that is, black and white, and not east and west, as the masses of the world have hitherto been led to believe. Look at the map of Europe, and you will see that the north of Africa there is Europe, highly industrialized and white, but Africa remains underdeveloped and black. To the north of South America, there is North America, highly industrialized and white, while South America remains underdeveloped and black. To the north of China, there is the Soviet Union, highly industrialized and white. And this point one must make very clear to the world, that when Mr. Kosygin was in London, he declared that the Soviet Union was a European power, and it is because of the Soviet attitude and foreign policies towards the Third World, towards the black countries, that in our definition, the Soviet Union is a white power country. Black intellectuals and students do not accept the situation of the world as it is today, and it's for this reason that many of us have pledged ourselves to get together in trying to destroy the white political structure that keeps us in enslavement. The countries of the Third World, which comprise the black nations, can develop their own resources on a joint basis for the benefit of their own peoples rather than for the European. In this way, they can develop their own democratic system, incorporating the welfare of their people and rejecting the white man's laws and his cultural imposition. According to the white man's history, nothing happened in Africa until Livingstone arrived, bringing with him to the so-called Dark Continent the white Christian civilization. In China, the Chinese were asleep until Marco Polo arrived and said to the Chinese, "Wake up!" And only then, we are told, was life infused into the Chinese. In the Americas, the same thing happened. If one happens to be a student of European history and of international history, one would have to accept that this whole concept of history has been distorted. White historians have justified the colonization of the black countries by writing history in such a way as to exonerate the white power structures of their atrocities. But all this history that has been fed to us is nothing more than a lot of political goulash. And our contemporaries are, at last, disputing the validity of the white man's history of the black man. It is because of the white man's greed and lust that the 2 world wars have already come about, and his inherent racialism may prompt a third. But if there is a 4th world war, it will have been fought with bows and arrows, for the white monster will have destroyed everything. The concept of black power, which originated in a remote section of Alabama and became the slogan of many black people, has become a challenge to all the previous formulations of progressive and white radical partisans of the black people's movement. The new concept is contained in an analysis of the white imperial societies of Western Europe. Black power has been the object of virulent attacks by the capitalist-controlled and reactionary press. White pseudo-liberals have also attacked it, misrepresenting its essence, and some have failed to understand it and thus distorted its content. In a little more than a year since the slogan was coined in Britain, many articles and comments on it have appeared in the leftist press, and discussions among intellectuals and leaders of various democratic and political movements have abounded. According to Leroy Bennett's definition, the idea of black power means the regrouping of black people within their own political institutions and in terms of their own culture. The message of black power, in the language used by its advocate, is directed at the poor black people in the ghettos of Notting Hill Gate, Brixton and Moss Side. Black power means the formation of bases of power from which the immigrants can establish coalitions with white people who have similar problems, but always on the basis of equality and not submission. The concept of black power also means the struggle to establish bases of political power instead of depending on the white man's political parties and white liberal left organizations. This, of course, will not be compatible with the ideas of the establishment. On the other hand, it is imperative that white people organize parallel political bases in local communities through which, at the right moment, they can unite with the bases established by the immigrants. This, together with the tendency towards decentralization, will encourage the collapse of the 2-party system. The political structure of this country is unable to satisfy the needs of the people. Integration is a subterfuge for maintaining white supremacy, and only when certain prerequisites are met, when the black man is nearly equal, will that equality mean anything, and will integration cease to be unilateral. Then integration at the new level will have a meaning. Until then, we say no to integration. The appearance of the slogan Black Power means a new stage in the radicalization of the immigrant masses, which accords with the principle that many more oppressed groups gain independence from the ruling class, the more radical it becomes. Until now, the capitalist bosses have been unable to contain and control the efforts of the black people to free themselves. Directly or indirectly, the capitalists and their flunkies make all the rules and then persecute us under the same laws which were legislated to protect us. The Race Relations Act is a classic example, and from it we know that we know how the white man's laws operate. Owing to a series of historical, economic, and religious factors, the leaders of the so-called black organizations have been acceptable leaders as far as the establishment is concerned. Reformists and fair-weather liberals who know what they can and cannot do, I sincerely hope that, as a consequence of the recent Commonwealth Immigration Act, all the black leaders of the immigrant communities in this country will rally to the call to unity and black power. As regards organization, the trend towards black power is in its early stages of development. The various groups and leaders who advocate black power have still not defined their relationship with each other, nor have they joined in a single organization, but they have grown numerically and are already stronger than any other previous movement. Ideologically and politically, black power is still in the process of development. Discussions and debates show that its advocates are still in process of outlining and polishing, making their ideas clearer and more concrete, while their inclination towards the left and towards increased militancy is undeniable. The concept of black power already embraces the ideas of internationalism and anti-imperialism. Many leaders of black power groups have made statements of solidarity with the peoples of Africa, Asia, Arabia, and Latin America in their fight against colonialism and neocolonialism. We have condemned the war in Vietnam, terming it a racist war, and how right our conclusion is when one asks oneself whether the Americans would go to South Africa to kill white people so as to enable my black brothers to be free. I do hope that those of our white blood brothers who really want to help will never even try to define black power for us, because as members of the human race we reserve the right. The most important aspect of black power is power. Frantz Fanon in his book The Wretched of the Earth makes this very clear. In a world where oppression is maintained from above, it is only possible to liquidate it with violence from below. Today the colour line is equated with the class line. Today, 2 out of 3 people in the world are dying of starvation. The 2 who are dying happen to be black, and the one who is not starving, be he capitalist, worker, peasant or priest, happens to be white. Workers are no longer workers, they have become black and white. A white worker employed with a coloured worker wants to create an aristocracy of labour, and when his condition is not met, he goes on strike. White first and worker afterwards. He would rather make a pact with his kith and kin capitalist exploiter and go to distant lands with guns, bayonets and napalm to decimate, rob and rape the workers and peasants of other races to whom he feels superior. Even communists are no longer communists, they also have become coloured and white. The white liberal believes in justice, equality and liberty. As long as these remain within the realm of abstraction, he believes in the fruits of revolution but disapproves of the revolution that brings them out. He cherishes the omelette but not cracking of the eggs. He is an internationalist when it comes to theories, but a white man when it comes to crunch. And the frightening thing is that here one is dealing with a man whose racialism is unconscious and who confuses intellectual masturbation with racial reality. We may not like this picture, but it is a picture of the world in which we live, of a world in which the conflict between capitalist and worker is admittedly real, but one in which the polarization of the world into black and white is even more real. Under these conditions, no black man in his right mind can be expected to carry innocence to the point of believing that he can seek to sustain durable power outside the bounds of the black camp. Besides, to seek economic power within the existing white structures could only mean a replacement of the exploitation of black by white by the exploitation of black by black, a mere displacement of colour discrimination by class discrimination. Since our objective is the annihilation of oppression, not the butchery of colour, the only way the black man can get real power is by smashing the system which incubates the exploitation of the black. If he cannot smash it from within, he must set in motion an international revolutionary force which will do the same job from without. The black man has no choice today. Either he smashes that system with active power, or the system will take advantage of his passive powerlessness and smash him. So from the foregoing analysis, black power can be defined as the totality of the economic, cultural, political, and if necessary, military power which the black peoples of the world must acquire in order to get the white oppressors off their backs. Black power in Britain. The Home Secretary in Britain has made a lot of declarations. Measures must be taken to ensure that racial violence now sweeping America does not occur in this country. The Home Secretary has not said that racial discrimination must be discontinued because it is evil, inhuman, and immoral. He couldn't. To call racism immoral would be to call his own government immoral. It was this government which legislated racism in this country with the Commonwealth Immigration Act of 1968. The Home Secretary made no effort to prevent the importation of racial violence into this country when only the black man was the victim of this violence in the States. He made no effort to keep it out when the blacks were being lynched and the little children bombed in churches. That was not violence worthy of prevention. But now the tide of revolution is turning and the white man is suddenly becoming the victim of race violence. The Home Secretary wants to prevent violence. When the white backlash seized the whole of America like a plague and swept the fascist Reagan into power in California, there was no talk of preventing it in Britain. But when the tornado of black power begins to rage, the Home Secretary wants emergency measures to prevent it. The implication is that he is not interested in stopping white violence, which has always been there. What he wants to prevent is black defense. The question is, can he prevent it? Even if he could perform this miracle, he is not going about it in the right way. How could he prevent the American type of racial explosion when he is repeating the mistakes of America? For too many years, the American white administration based their complacent attitude towards the racial problem on the historical assumption that the minority never resorts to violence. Today they are paying for it. The Home Secretary is limiting immigration to Britain while Enoch Powell is even preaching complete deportation. The assumption is that the less number of blacks, the less likely are they to resort to violence. This is a wild dream. Black power is not a quantitative entity, it is qualitative. Black power is not a number, it is a degree of anger which the oppressed black man feels inside. It takes a single matchstick to burn London down. It takes one angry black man to light the match. Black power is a revolutionary movement of black people. The smaller the number of people involved, the more secure the movement. The black man is hitting out because he has been pushed to the limit where he can no longer breathe. To live, he has to breathe. No Home Secretary, Labour or Tory can stop him from burning down the social system organised to enslave him. The present Home Secretary has done nothing to assuage this black indignation. On the contrary, what we see in this country is the police hounding plain-seeking black leaders on the one hand, and the press using the sign of imagery to slander them as pimps, drug addicts and thieves on the other. With this, they hope to denigrate the black leaders in the eyes of their followers. The British should learn from the American scene because the Americans tried to do the same thing and they failed. What they see is the white police kicking down the black militants and arresting them for assaulting the police. The idea is to dampen their spirits with handcuffs and a grueling sentence in jail. America tried it too and only succeeded in extending the black revolution in the jailhouse when the passive Negro prisoners of yesteryear were converted to active participation in the revolution. What we see is middle-class so-called black leadership and sophisticated la-di-da organizations being forged and imposed on the black masses of Britain and given recognition as black mouthpieces. The trick is that with these black tentacles of white oppression, the black masses will forever be lulled into the illusion that something is being done for them. America tried this too and found that the grassroots have a way of picking their own leadership, with New York, Detroit, Watts and Cleveland to prove it. Today in America, white persons of power and state governors are pleading with tears in their eyes to negotiate with this real black leadership, only to find that this leadership, thanks to the recklessness of the police, has long been driven underground far beyond the reach of white negotiators. The white press that wanted them dismissed as hoodlums now pleads for a second opportunity to eat their words. But the invisible black leadership prefers to remain invisible. They have learned underground that the only way to remain invincible is to remain invisible. What use is press limelight when a single cry of "burn baby burn" can set a whole city ablaze? Press prominence is paper power. Grassroots power is real, and this is called black power. What we see now in Britain is Stokely Carmichael being asked never to return. The logic that once you have got rid of Stokely, you got rid of black power. America tried it too, only to discover that the best way to make a saint of Malcolm X was to get rid of him. America learned, as Britain must learn, that it is futile to get rid of revolutionaries when the very situation which makes people revolutionary is left intact. There is a difference between a philosopher and his philosophy. Getting rid of one does not mean getting rid of the other. There is a difference between the revolutionary and the revolution. A revolutionary is not the revolution. He is only a tiny speck in the wind of revolution. There are many there are many more specks besides. What we see is a Britain where a Home Secretary is talking about legislating against racial discrimination. This presumption is that legislation is a cure for racism. America tried it too and has learned that legislating against racism is as effective as legislating against syphilis. Britain must wake up to the realization that what she is dealing with here is a terrible man-eating disease which must be destroyed at once, or she will be destroyed by it. The question is it already too late? We believe that the attitude of the white man is an attitude which is a collective attitude in Britain. The attitude ignores the basic factor of history. Every English person in England is an immigrant. It is arrant impertinence that one immigrant should demand entry as a favour from another. Every time a black man opens his mouth in protest, the white man comes out with the same question: why don't you go back to where you came from? This attitude is based on a presumption. The presumption is that the black man is here by his own choice. This is a historic lie. The black man is no more responsible for being here than the Cockney is responsible for being in Bermondsey. The black man here is only a speck in the wind of history. It was the Englishman who set that wind in motion. Had the Russians colonized Africa, the black man would have been in Russia today. Had the Chinese raped Africa and Asia, as the British did and still do, the black man would be flooding China today. No, we are not here of our own choosing. We do not enjoy slotting machines for heat. We do not enjoy the tyranny of landladies. We do not enjoy the taunts and insults of teddy boys hiding in police uniforms. We do not enjoy seeing our beautiful black sisters on their hands and knees scrubbing the passageways of tube stations for ungrateful white people. We do not enjoy the agony in the eyes of those black girls when they look up and see the intellectual inferiors strolling by in jollity and affluence simply because they happen to be white girls. Every crack of a white stiletto on the platforms is a stab in the heart of a black girl who waits on her knees, mop in hand, for the female members of the master race to sail by in jewels and diamonds which were stolen from the blacks. We do not enjoy our talented actresses and actors starving in a community which claims to be more racially adjusted than a Poitiers producing America. We do not enjoy seeing the political Baldwins of Britain being forced out of existence simply because they dare write the truth. We do not enjoy being black in a white-controlled Britain. No, we have not come here of our own choice. The white man came to us first. He came to our country and gave birth to a history which has brought black and white together. To date, that history has been a one-sided economic equation. We are here to balance that equation. It was the slavery of the black man that provided the capital for the Industrial Revolution of the West. It was black sweat that built the white civilization. It was the flow of black blood that saved Britain in her world wars, just as the same black blood is saving America in Vietnam. It was the exploitation of black lands which made Britain great. Black essence has for centuries been the pulse, life and blood of white people on this isle. If the accumulated wealth of Britain is shared among the black immigrants here, Britain will still be a long way indebted to her black benefactors. Yet we are expected to be grateful for partaking of the mere crumbs which fall from the table of our debtors. When the black man from the Caribbean plays his calypso records, white neighbors cry out against the black invasion of white culture. The entire white state machinery is set in motion to acculturate this unfortunate black man. Commissions are set up and the help of the mighty BBC is enlisted to assimilate this uncultured black fellow. But when a white man from Britain goes to Zimbabwe, not only will he insist on changing the name of the place to Rhodesia, he even goes further to preclude the native black man from having a say in the administration of his own soil until he learns the language and the administrative peculiarities of the white refugee. Isn't that the limit? We demand our cultural integrity as black people everywhere and warn parent and school management in this country to spare the psychological development of our school children by never referring to them again as lowerers of standards. On violence. We do not advocate violence, but we believe that the only way to neutralize violence is to oppose it with violence. We are no initiators of violence, but if a white man lays his hand on one of us, we regard it as an open declaration of war on all of us. We do not believe in racial arrogance, but we have plenty of racial pride. If the white man, whose record of racial arrogance has infuriated people all over the world, wants to stand between us and the modicum of pride which is ours, we will ask him to get out of the way. If the white man does not want his cinema in flames, there will be no more Africa adios. The white man will be well advised to keep his bowler while I keep to my dhoti. If he insists on calling me a savage, I may not bother calling him a savage in return, but I might be persuaded to show him how a real savage behaves, and then no doubt he would be in good company. We are willing to accept that good white people exist, but we must say no when we are asked to let this existence of exceptions distract us from our task. When a man has a problem, he concentrates on the problem and not on the exceptions. When a man's house is on fire and sees his bedroom on fire, his sitting room on fire, but his kitchen is not on fire, what is he to do? Not raise a fire alarm because there is an exception in the kitchen? Of course, it is laughable, but this is the kind of logic our white liberal friends expect of us. They want us to giggle when it doesn't tickle and scratch where it doesn't itch. The time for that is over. This is a new era, the era of black power. We have brought this about. It is like water springing up from the bowels of the earth. It is like a well shattering open the surface of the earth. Before the water bursts into the open, it does not know which course it is going to take. But once on top, there is only one way for it to go, the way to the south. Once on the move, there is only one course the water must run, the way to the sea. So it is with the Black Revolution. It is now on the move. There is only one way for it to go, that is the way to total liberation. All we can do is shorten the journey to the end. What we must do is slash open a revolutionary canal which will quicken our tidal move to liberation. Whether this will mean a swim through a tidal wave of blood no longer depends on us. All we know is that we have to move, and move we must. All we can see is that we have a job to do and we must do it quickly. And the only way to construct a canal is to cut away every obstruction in its path. We believe that the time has come when black people must stand up and be counted. This is the only way for black people, not only in Britain but all over the world, since this is an international problem which has been organised by racists on an international scale. We believe that black power can only be achieved by the consciousness of black people in the third world. The concept of black power, which originated in a remote section of Alabama and became the slogan of many black people, has become a challenge to all the previous formulations of progressive and white radical partisans of the black people's movement. The new concept is contained in an analysis of the white imperialist societies of Western Europe. Black power has been the object of virulent attacks by the capitalist-controlled and reactionary press. White pseudo-liberals have also attacked it, misrepresenting its essence, and some have failed to understand it and have thus distorted its content. In a little more than a year since the slogan was coined in Britain, many articles and comments on it have appeared in the leftist press, and discussions amongst intellectuals and leaders of various democratic and political movements have abounded. According to Leroy Bennett's definition, the idea of black power means regrouping of black people within their own political institutions and in terms of their own culture. The message of black power, in the language used by its advocate, is directed at the poor black people in the ghettos of Notting Hill, Gates, Brixton and Moss Side. Black power means the formation of bases of power from which the immigrants can establish coalitions with white people who have similar problems, but always on a basis of equality and not submission. The concept of black power also means the struggle to establish bases of political power instead of depending on the white man's political parties and white liberal left organizations. This, of course, will not be compatible with the ideas of the establishment. On the other hand, it is imperative that the white people organize parallel political bases in local communities through which, at the right moment, they can unite with the bases established by the immigrants. This, together with the tendency towards decentralization, will encourage the collapse of the two-party system. End of quote. Very interesting document from 1968 from Roy Sawh on black power. There's a lot there that one can explore, and there just isn't the time and it's not conducive in this realm to really go into everything, but a few points. It's really interesting looking back in these histories to see the dynamic way in which new immigrants who are oppressed by white supremacy forge the radical class struggle at the grassroots, and it's just this dynamism, this two things that are one thing at the same time. New immigrants from former or actual British colonies and the radical socialist working class movement around a framework of black-led resistance or black power struggle. This is really important because look at the situation today. It's become disconnected. As we have second and third generation growing up now, and we've moved away from the radical kind of continuities of the anti-colonial struggle from the homeland to the colonial centre, i.e. from the colony to London and England. that fusion of immigrant and radical politics has largely been broken down. And this requires a lot of reflection and analysis and discussion and critique. Brexit. Can you see how Brexit is absolutely consciously a means of the British state to formally negate the class struggle in the country? Can you see how obvious it is? It's just in plain sight. And as the Black Power consciousness has just whittled down, new immigrants arrive and they don't have the confidence to fight for their class interests in a united way, as has been advocated previously in the 60s and 70s, going into the 80s and even the 90s a little bit. They just don't have the confidence. They come here with inferiority complex because of global white supremacy and coloniality. They come here being insecure about how they look, how they speak, how they smell, what they cook, and the rest of it. They don't feel that they can demand militantly their rights because they feel that they're guests here as inferiorized people being hosted by the privileged overseer of the colonial white population in general in society and of the powers that be. And look at the powers that be. People in black and brown skin, Kwasi Kwarteng, Priti Patel, Suella Braverman, Rishi Sunak, people who look like them, are at the same time telling them, we might expel you to Rwanda, you know. You coming here on small boats is the problem in society, you know. Look at me, I look like you, but look what I'm saying. It kind of even deepens even further the inferiority complex, the ability to allow the oppressor and the exploiter of the capitalist system to exploit and oppress you. It's fascinating. And so far have we travelled from this Black Power consciousness to a colonial identity of being quote-unquote British Asian or quote-unquote Black British. It's just a 180-degree turnaround from where we were on a path to resistance and liberation and dignity and not accepting the way we're being blasted by racism, to today where racism comes back with a vengeance. And there's just hardly any ability to push back on that. But still, in the last 15 years or so, it's still basically that radicalism of the fearless racialized immigrant that has led the two most important instances of class struggle in the last 20, 30 years, which was August of 2011 and the summer of 2020, particularly June the 13th of 2020. Very interesting and important issues. We'll continue more on the series on Roy Sawh, but please do engage with this. Give us some feedback, some critique, some comments, continue to share. Many thanks.